So how fast into the business did the Shark Tank part come?
Well, we actually applied for Shark Tank when we were a few months into the business and got accepted. Thank God we were smart enough to know not to go on it. We're on track to do about $5 million at the time that we filmed. Start with one product and nail how you're gonna market it.
Hi everyone, welcome back to a new episode of Dare to be Fearless. I said on last week's episode that I've been in Connecticut and I was born and raised here, and people definitely get different sides of Connecticut confused. Like everyone for the most part who's cool and super smart is closer to the New York side, and it's very rare that I find people on the other side. But it's very, very rare that I find someone who is in Connecticut at all who's the founder of one of my absolute favorite products. For those of you who are not familiar with cakes, it is the number one selling, right? Nipple cover, but it's not even a nipple cover. Like, it has so much protection in ways that are so different from any other cover you've potentially bought at, say, like a TJ Maxx or even on Amazon. And so I've got the co-founder of Cakes, Taylor, here. She's from Boston, not Connecticut originally, which is very sad, but we're filming this in Connecticut. So Taylor, thank you so much for being on the show.
So nice to meet you.
So I think most people are probably very curious of why in 2022 you decided to start making nipple covers, because it's so niche, it's so strange, but it works, and it was so needed in this market.
I mean, the path to freedom was nipple covers, obviously. It seems so obvious now. But at the time, 2022 was the middle of COVID. I had just had my daughter. My marketing job felt like it was kind of at a standstill. I remember vividly, I was trying to take my daughter to a swimming lesson on Tuesdays at 2. That was like what I wanted to do. And the way my schedule was, like, most of your bosses don't let you like kind of take off when you need to do something with your kids, and it was just becoming apparent that to be a working parent in like a traditional corporate environment wasn't going to last for long. So I was trying really hard to be able to go part-time with my job, but also be able to still continue to grow and thrive and climb the corporate ladder. And my boss told me to start looking for another job. It was like, this isn't going to work here. So I was like, okay, we've always had this idea. It was a simple idea. We hated the pads in our sports bras. We're like, what if we just created a better nipple cover that was gentle and you could work out in and you could wear it every day? And at that time, it felt like we really had to figure out a path to get out of this like corporate standstill we were in. So my sister and I put it out with a single Instagram post. We didn't have TikTok, and thought maybe our mom and our mom's friends would buy it. And that's really where it all started.
So when you say one Instagram post, like what was involved with this post?
We got really bad photography done.
Classic. At the beginning of any business. Because you guys self-funded this.
Yeah, we started with, Casey and I put in $5,000. We each put in $5,000. All of that pretty much went into our initial round of inventory, and then this photography that I'm mentioning.
In Boston?
It was, I think we like outsourced it to someone in LA, but she was like a student. Yeah. She really didn't, she was learning too, like we didn't know. And it was good enough to do a post about it. And then I just started talking about it on Instagram. And for the first few months, we would sell like a few hundred units a month. My sister was fulfilling everything out of her condo. I was just like talking about it on Instagram stories. Really, things like weren't chugging along. And then I talked to my friend Ebony. She'd been friends for years, and she had started to blow up on TikTok. And I was like, I really need to figure out how to market this thing because things are just really slow right now. And she's like, if you get on TikTok, you can blow it up on TikTok. And I was like, what? Like, people aren't really even shopping on TikTok. TikTok Shop didn't even exist. I'm like, even if we go viral, there's no way we're going to be able, like, someone's not going to see the video and then go buy it. And so she's like, no, just trust me. She told me told me this exact formula to go viral on TikTok. I followed it for 30 days. And at the 30-day mark, the first video went viral. We completely sold out of our inventory. We went from doing like a couple hundred units ever to hundreds of units overnight. And that kind of formula would repeat for pretty much every month for the first year. And then we were able to to build some infrastructure to create a real business, as I call it.
So was that your proof of concept, that success?
Yeah.
But you were still working a traditional job.
Yeah. So I worked my full-time job. Well, I had actually been able to go to part-time. At the time, they were telling me to look for another job. Like, I knew it wasn't like a long-term thing, but I was able to go to part-time. They didn't know I was working on this. And my boss ended up seeing one of my TikToks, which I think was the dead giveaway at some point. I was like, oh, shoot. Nothing to see here. But I was working my full-time job for 8 months. And then at that point, we were making enough money that I felt like I could take the leap and at least come close to paying myself I think we made $14,000 our first year.
Oh, that's low. Business. Yeah, that's very low.
But it was enough to cover my child care. Like, I had enough. That was like the big thing. I think if you're a working parent or if you have another job, it's like, how do you find the time to moonlight and fit in your side hustle? And it's kind of this dance because you're not making enough money to go full time. If you're a working parent, you're not making enough to really afford all this extra child care while you work on it. So I would work in my lunch break. I don't know if we really had a lunch break. I gave myself a lunch break. I'd work in my lunch break for 1 hour, and then I had convinced my husband, like, we need to get 1 extra hour of childcare a day. So my work day was done at 2, and I was able to keep my daughter's babysitter on till 3. So basically I had like it worked out to 10 hours a week I was able to work on the side hustle for 8 months while things were starting to grow. And that's like what I always tell people is just consistency over intensity, because just chip away at it every day. You don't need to make these giant strides. Like, if you can just stay consistent, you'll figure out a path.
So is your advice for an aspiring founder to not leave their day job? Because like I never had an experience even with it, so I just went full force in entrepreneurship. But looking back, would you have changed anything about that first year?
Yeah, unless you have the luxury of not needing money. Whether it's you have a partner who can kind of fund your life for the time being, or you still live with your parents. That's why I think it's amazing for college students or kids in their young 20s to be able to start businesses, because you have a safety net. Unless you're in that situation, you need to get to the point where I knew I could pay myself a small salary to get through the next 6 months. I felt pretty confident in that. Like, you start and fail so many times before you find the thing. So yeah, definitely don't. It's so tempting though, because you're like, I believe in this, but just like keep your head down and you'll be able to jump.
So I'm curious now with how successful Cakes got, and obviously it's now wildly more successful, but on TikTok, looking back, or advice you would give to a founder now who is like, if this happens to disappear, and by the time this episode comes out, either way, it will either be there or gone, what would you say to them? Because you can't really rely potentially on this anymore.
Totally. You need to pour gas on whatever fire is burning, as much gas on whatever fire is burning. So whatever tactic is working for you, double down, triple down. That should be your first hire. That should be where 90% of your effort is going to, especially in the early days when you need to make money to be able to sustain this dream. And don't get too comfortable. In the background, like, you need to always be diversifying your tactics, because there are also brands. It's funny now with the TikTok ban being in conversations, we have a lot of reporters reaching out to us because of what we're doing on TikTok Shop. Like, aren't you nervous? Does this change your strategy? It actually doesn't change our strategy at all. There was a phase in, like, right before the elections where brands weren't profitable on Meta. So the Meta algorithm could change overnight. Meta could become unprofitable overnight. So no matter what the channel is, you always need to be thinking about, I can't get too comfortable here. What's next? And how can I be as diversified as possible?
Super helpful. I feel like also with the e-commerce space, and I found this, I started this e-commerce business last year, and it was very fast, successful via Etsy. I did no TikTok, nothing. And people were like, you need to be on TikTok. And I'm like, yes, but also, I don't want to rely 100% on my efforts there, because this other way is working. So then we built out a website. And I would think for Cakes, a lot of your consumers are going right to the Cakes website. Like, when I first bought Cakes, before I even knew who started it, I went to your website. I personally did not purchase it from TikTok.
Yeah, it's almost like a business card. Like, the website is nice because it's like a professional business card. You get credibility. But yeah, definitely, especially when you're bootstrapping or working with just a very small team or by yourself as a solo entrepreneur, like it's really easy for other people to give you ideas of this is where you should be selling. This is what you should be doing. Have you thought, the thing we got constantly was, have you thought about selling in boutiques? My friend owns a gym. Can you sell in there? Such a nice thought. But if we had gone down that path, we would be probably out of business right now because the amount of time and energy to sell, let's say 100 units in 10 different boutiques is 10 times more than to sell 10,000 units online. Like, it's so much easier to scale what you're doing online than that strategy.
So how fast into the business did the Shark Tank part come?
Well, we actually applied for Shark Tank when we were a few months into the business and got accepted. Thank God we were smart enough to know not to go on it. It was like, at the time, our only strategy was going viral on TikTok. We were a few months in. We were like, okay, we're going viral on TikTok. We started to have significant sales. We did $1 million in our first year just from like going viral on TikTok. Like, there was no strategy behind it, really. Like, I should say there wasn't a scalable strategy behind it. So the sharks would have eaten us alive. They would have been like, this is not sustainable. Like, this is not a plan. This isn't a long-term business. So we ended up pulling out and then reapplying the following year. So we went on, in the middle of our second year, we were on track to do about $5 million at the time that we filmed. And we actually had a really good proof of concept on digital. Basically, what was happening at the time we went on Shark Tank is we had been able to take our top performing organic TikTok videos and start to put them on paid digital and like paid Meta, paid Google, stuff like that. And they were super efficient. Like, it was really cost effective for us to do social media marketing. So we felt like, okay, we have like a good business plan at least.
Were you scared when you first said no to them that they wouldn't say yes again?
Yeah, I was like, I mean, that's the thing, is like knowing when to say no is really hard, especially when you're really in need of money. Like, at the time we said no, I was still working my full-time job. I'm like desperate to leave my full-time job, like, and really work on this full-time. It was hard to say no. Or the retail thing, like, yeah, we could have used a few $1,000s from these small boutiques that were willing to buy cakes, but saying no to the things that are kind of a distraction in order to stay focused on what's going to move the needle is like probably the secret to our growth.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's such an interesting niche too, because I mean, from years ago, I would go to a TJ Maxx, like I said, or Marshalls or whatever, and I've always seen these nipple covers or tape, etc. What do you think it is about cakes that has made this particular industry so disrupted?
Well, I get a lot of inspiration from companies that make an existing product just a little bit better. Like, you don't need to come up with this crazy invention that no one's ever heard of or thought of. Like, if you can make a product a little bit better by addressing a major pain point that you're having with it. Like, for us, it was, we didn't like that the adhesives would irritate our skin. We didn't like that the shape and size would show through our clothes. Like, there were just like very simple things. We're like, what if we just make it a little better? And so I think the product itself is superior, but our ability to market it and put a brand around it is actually kind of remarkable. Like,
huge.
Like, the fact that in 3 years we've made a brand around nipple covers. Like, that's not an easy thing to talk about, or for, you know, other people on social media to talk about. It's very taboo still. Like, it's interesting. So I think just like, and that's kind of, I guess, like one of my main pieces of advice for anyone who's starting a business or has a product idea. Don't feel like you need this whole product line, or, oh, I want to start an apparel brand and I need this whole line. Start with one product and nail how you're going to market it. Nail how you're going to sell it. Because if you can't sell and create ownership in what you're selling, like in what your product is, you're never going to be able to scale. And yeah, there's a lot of, I guess my ego at the beginning was like, this is kind of embarrassing. We have one product. 3 years in, we really sell primarily like one product. 95% of our sales are one product. But that's also the reason we've been able to scale.
So at the end of the day, what do you think makes you the most fearless? Like, if I'm really curious, if cakes hadn't been so successful in that first year, would you have kept going with it?
I probably wouldn't have. I would have charted a new path. Like I think it's hard because you have to figure out when to cut bait, and when something's not working, you need to chart a new path. Like just leave it behind and go to the next path. But you also want to be resilient and keep working, so that you don't give up on something too soon. But I think for me, confidence is built, and like the fearlessness is built in the process a little bit. Like I did not have anywhere near the level of confidence I have now when we started. I remember the first networking event I went to. It was literally the week after we launched Cakes with our silly Instagram post. Rebecca Minkoff was there. And it was like obviously an incredible opportunity. If I was there now, I would have like so much I'd want to ask her and talk to her about. But I felt so much pressure to like pretend we were further along or feel so buttoned up. And really, like, I had no idea what I was doing, and that's okay. Like, I would go to her now and say, we have no idea, like, we're at kind of like this inflection point. I don't know what I should be, whatever. I'd ask her 1,000,001 questions, but I just felt like so crippled by like a little bit of this insecurity and feeling like I shouldn't have been in the room. And I remember just feeling like a pit in my stomach when I left. I'm like, I blew it, but that's okay. Like, I think the confidence comes when you get reps in and you're in those situations and you're putting yourself out there, and that's just a really hard thing to do.
It's very fearless.